Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the May 23rd, 2018 briefing session of the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining. Before we start, I have a couple of comments to make, and then we'll turn the time over to Director Baza. First comment, I'd like to thank all those that were involved in last night's open house for the Energy Excellence, Environmental Excellence Awards. That went very, very well, and we want to thank Director Baza and Julianne and anyone else that was involved in that. I think that's the forum we'd like to look at for the future. I know I sure enjoyed having that extra time to talk to the recipients and to get to know them a little better, and that went extraordinarily well. Second thing was a week ago we had the Governor's Energy Summit, and the people I talked to and the things that I got to see, the place was abuzz with discussions about our pilot projects and the results of that. The quick summary was that with about 7 rigs and just drilling the pilot projects, the wells are coming in sufficiently large that the Salt Lake area refineries have been swamped with production. And so the question was put forward a number of times about where do we go from here, what kind of additional infrastructure do we need as a state, what's the low-hanging fruit, what's the long-term benefits of all of this. So this is, I think the state has kind of figured out that something really nice is going on. So those of you that are involved in that as well, we thank you for your involvement and for the excitement that's going forward. Any questions on that or other observations? With that, then, Director Baza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is John Baza, Director of the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. Thank you for being here in Salt Lake City on this fine spring day for your May meeting. And in terms of what Mr. Gill mentioned and the Environmental Excellence Awards, I would say thank you right back at you. Those are your awards. You took the time to be considerate and give awards where awards were due, and I think that the fact that they represent a commemoration of the good work that's being done by the extractive industries in Utah is a wonderful thing to do. To start out this morning, I'd like to, as is tradition, introduce a new employee that we have in the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. And if Kim Coburn is here, if she would stand up. Okay. Kim is an engineer and a new lead in the minerals program. She is a self-proclaimed nerd and can tell you way too much about Star Trek, comics, and Lord of the Rings. She is originally from Ohio and has lived in Utah for over 5 years. She has her professional engineering license and has been utilizing GIS for over 9 years. She earned her bachelor's in civil engineering with a minor in astrophysics at the University of Toledo. Her master's focused on water quality, modeling, and reporting. She has worked on with several municipalities on the utilization of GIS with their utilities. She specializes in water resource management, including hydraulic modeling of infrastructure, floodplain modeling, and stormwater delineations. So we welcome Kim to the staff of the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
Welcome, Kim, and we noticed that last night you were one of the hard workers at that event, and we thank you very much.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
The next thing we have on the agenda is for several years now, our staff has been in conversation with Ms. Sarah Fields, And Sarah, why don't you come on up and have a seat? Sarah Fields is Program Director of Uranium Watch, formerly located in Moab and now located in Monticello, Utah. Ms. Fields has lived in southeast Utah and worked on uranium mining and milling issues for over 15 years. She's here to speak to you about the topic that she's been engaged with staff in for some time and wanted to have this time to present to the board. So, Ms. Fields.
Thank you for this opportunity to come before you, and thanks very much to the staff. I'm just going to go over the pictures on this PowerPoint. You have also received some written material. Some of the issues that I originally brought forward to the staff, and then informal comments I made on the proposed rule having to do with temporary cessation of operation of hard rock mines. I'm familiar with uranium mines. I am not familiar with other hard rock mining operations in Utah, but I think the situation with other hard rock mines might be similar to some of these situations with uranium mines. So I'm going to go over this, and then hopefully you'll have some questions. So this is a picture of the Pandora mine, waste rock pile, and recently the BLM authorized the expansion of this mine on the waste rock pile, but the mine has been on standby since 2012. These are what's called the La Salle Mines Complex. It's the Snowball, Pandora, La Salle, and Beaver Shaft. And they're all connected. They're in close vicinity of each other, and then they're all connected underground. There's some waste rock piles, and this is the Beaver Shaft waste rock pile. The mine's on private land, but there's a waste rock pile which is on on BLM land, and you can see the beautiful La Salle Mountains in the background. And this is very close to the community of La Salle. The main shaft for the Beaver Shaft and the radon emissions are right behind the local school and post office and store in La Salle. Here is some uranium ore on the Beaver Shaft waste rock pile. The proposed rules would address temporary suspension of operation of hard rock mines and related issues. Some of us have this term, and that's zombie mines. And these are mines that we feel are neither dead nor alive. They are not in operation, but they haven't gone through the reclamation process. And some of these mines have been under temporary suspension for decades. So the mines remain on standby indefinitely without proper authorization from either the division staff or the Oil, Gas, and Mining Board, and without reasonable justification. 5 uranium mines produced ore since 2006, which was the beginning of the last uranium boom, which lasts from about 2007 to 2012 here in Utah. It was a very short boom, and some permitted mines did not commence operation during that time. But the Dineros, which was a new mine, the La Salle Mines Complex, previously permitted, the Rim, a previously permitted mine, and the Tony M mine, a new mine, were the ones that went into production. But there you have 4 permitted mines that did not go into production in 2006 7 to 12. That's Energy Queen, last produced ore in 1982. The Red Block 4, that was permitted in 1979, never produced ore. Sage on BLM land, last produced ore in 1990 without a BLM plan of operations. And the Velvet Mine produced ore in 84 or 85 and is only permitted for reclamation, but it still has not been reclaimed after many decades. The Energy Fuels, which operates the White Mesa Mill, owns the Energy Queen and the Red Block 4, and then the other operating mines are Energy Fuels mines. The regulations for temporary suspension of operation are vague and they're erratically enforced. There's a failure to develop and implement a comprehensive regulatory program. An example is that after 10 years of suspension of operation, a mine owner is supposed to come to the board and request an extension of that 10-year time frame. That has not happened for the Energy Queen, the Red Block, the Sage, the Velvet. During a 10-year period of non-operation for the LaSalle mines, there were letters telling the owners that they had to come to the board, but it sort of drifted off, and they never came to the board to ask for an extension beyond 10 years. And they call this temporary suspension of operation, but for these mines, they spend more time not operating than they do operating from the going back to the 1970s. Here's another, this is a picture of the Energy Queen, which last operated in 1982, and it's right next to Highway 46, which goes from 191 south of Moab and then up through LaSalle and over the road, heads over to Paradox in Colorado. And it's right next to the road. Here's it, and that's a wet mine, so they had a water treatment system to remove particulates and radium and for discharge of the water. So that's the old line storage pond where they would precipitate out the some of the materials, and then later it would go through a process to remove the radium. So that line pond is still there. And there's a small building, which it turns out was unlocked, and barium chloride sacks, old sacks and full sacks were in that building. And here's a sign, it says caution, respiration and goggles and gloves must be worn when handling barium chloride, and yet even though this was on private land, this hazardous material was not in a locked building. It was in an open building since the 1980s. And here are some of the issues related to extended periods of non-operation. Mine reclamation is delayed indefinitely, and that's why the mine owners like this. They do not have to commit the funds that they need to reclaim the mines. And this will go on, as you can see, for some mines for decades. And there's a dispersal of radiological and non-radiological contaminants on and off site. Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining has not in the past required interim management plans. The BLM did, but mines on BLM land in southeast Utah went through periods of operation, non-operation, without the required interim management plans. And it wasn't until 2014 when I brought it to the attention of the BLM that they actually asked Energy Fuels and some of the other mine owners to submit these plans, and now the Dogum staff feels that that is an appropriate thing to request from the mine owners. You have old and new health and safety hazards that are not addressed, site degradation, erosion, accumulation of trash and old equipment, infrequent inspections, usually a yearly inspection, but sometimes there'll be a couple of years go by when the mines are not inspected by either the oil, gas, and mining staff or the BLM staff. Sometimes they do joint inspections, and sometimes oil, gas, and mining and BLM do their independent inspections. I've noticed on BLM and the division staff inspections that the inspector will make a recommendation, and yet there's no indication on any of the publicly available documents that the staff follows up with those recommendations. The inspector makes the recommendations and nothing happens. The mines under reclamations are not required to complete reclamation work, and the staff is currently pushing Anfield Resources to reclaim the Velvet Mine, which last operated in 84 or 85. The mine owners can fool investors into thinking mines will reopen. I have read documents and reports submitted by mine owners to the Canadian authorities and giving them impression that the mines just, in no time at all, they'll be ready to operate when in fact they're not ready to operate. An example is the Sage Mine and the Velvet Mine. Their impacts to wildlife and domestic animals, and animals wander around unfenced sites. That Beaver Shaft Waste Rock Pile, has animal. I've seen both horse and cattle. Evidence of horses and cows going on the pile. Here's the Rim Mine, which is in San Juan County. That closed down in 2009. Much of the equipment has been removed. That too is a wet mine. So here is a water treatment pond where water containing radium was stored, and these treatment ponds are now dry. And there's no requirement for the mine owner to determine what the radiological contamination is at the mines. Here's the waste rock pile at the Rim Mine, and then there's leakage from the waste rock pile, and that area was also where water from the mine water discharge used to accumulate, and it's fenced to keep deer and cattle out. And this whole area is not fenced, and cows wander in and out at will. Here's the Sage Mine. That's in Summit Canyon. You can see where the waste rock and low-grade ore is dumped on the side of the canyon. This operated briefly in 1981 and then briefly in 1990. Here's a building there at the Sage Mine with a lot of stored junk and stored material. I don't think any of this material has been removed. Here's where the mine portal collapsed. It's since been filled in, but I don't know, and I'm sure no one really knows how long it was collapsed before it was discovered that there was an open hole. And here's a picture of an unstable, unprotected mine opening. This is from the DOE Abandoned Uranium Mine Report. So this is one of many, many abandoned uranium mines in southeastern Utah. So going over the proposed changes to the regulations, Uranium Watch feels that you need to establish a clear set of goals and outcomes for the proposed rules. I believe that you should conform some regulations to BLM regulations, because most of the uranium mines in southeastern Utah are also on BLM land, and to have similar regulations. For example, the mine owner should notify the division as soon as the mine goes on standby or a period of temporary suspension of operation. And these mine operation, suspension of operation, and recommencement of operation should be clearly defined. I believe that the definition of mine operation should require the development of either developing the mine or the removal of ore. The mine should not be considered operational if all they're doing is exploring. Like the Sage Mine, which hasn't operated since 1990. They did some exploration around 2013, and they drilled some monitoring wells, and yet that was considered mine operation. So they get, you know, it's like the line moves for the period of time. They need to have a 5-year approval of mine, the continuation, the standby period, or coming to the board after 10 years. The company that owns that mine does not have the funding, and the price of uranium is the lowest it's been, is very low, and is expected to keep very low. So there's just no indication that the Sage Mine will ever operate again. The division should require the notification of the division in writing when a mine suspends operation for more than 30 days. Require the submittal of interim management plans as part of the notice of intent, or if there's already an existing notice of intent, when the mine operation is suspended, if the IMP is not part of the original notice of intent. Should require the implementation of an interim management plan as soon as a mine goes on a period of temporary suspension. For example, uranium mines have radiation vents, and it used to be in the LaSalle area where there's about 30 of these vents scattered around on BLM land, private land in the forest, that the company was not required to cover up these vents, and by natural convection, radon from underground would still be vented. Now, the BLM and probably the division is requiring that all those vents be covered, so radon no longer emanates from the uranium mines during these lengthy periods. So that's an example of why an interim management plan that clearly lays out everything that must be done during these lengthy periods. I mean, I'm talking about years, I'm talking about decades, not just 6 months or a year, but during these non-operational periods. So the site will be maintained in a proper manner. And also, you should retain the provision regarding the withdrawal of a notice of intent for failure to pay mine fees. In the proposed rule, the division was thinking that that should be removed. You have 2 periods. You have, in the current regulations, you have a 2-year suspension period. And the division is supposed to make some kind of a determination at the end of the 2-year period regarding continued standby. So there should be a notification of the division at the end of the 2-year period. There should be a notification of the division at the end of the 5-year period. And after these periods, the division must make a comprehensive evaluation of the status of the mine. The staff, if the staff does not approve an extension of a non-operation period after 5 years, the mine owner must reclaim the mine. Also, you have a current regulation having to do with 10-year suspension period. The mine owner is supposed to come to you folks with an application for your approval of extension beyond 10 years. But as far as I can tell, that is not being enforced by the division staff or the board. I also feel that the division should limit the period of suspension of operation to 20 years. Mines should not just sit there decade after decade without operating like the Sage, the Energy Queen, the Red Block number 4, without going through a reclamation period. If the price of uranium or the other mineral goes back up, a mine operator can submit a new notice of intent like they did for the Tonium mine, like they did for the Dineros mine, and they can commence a new operation, but they have to start from day one. Also feel it's important that the division define deleterious material in terms of a radiological cleanup standard. That is picocuries per gram of radium rather than a dose standard. The EPA has a standard for uranium mills, and the EPA often in the cleanup of old mines, abandoned uranium mines, they use a radiological standard based on the amount of radium and other radionuclides in the soil. It's not a dose standard. I think you should improve the inspection program and that the board, the staff should respond to the inspector's suggestions. Okay, that's it. So are there any questions?
Board members, any questions? Starting on the right. Sure you turn your mics on.
Certainly, I appreciate you bringing this to the board's attention. And would it be possible to go back to your slide 18?
Okay, here. Yes.
There's some very good suggestions here, and I'm anxious or looking forward to hearing what the division has to say about some of these suggestions and issues you brought up. I'm wondering, though, how a corporation who's invested a significant amount of money into these sites respond to some of these questions or these regulations. For example, you mentioned that mines should not be considered, as number 5, can be considered operational if only exploration is occurring. That's, I think, a fairly broad term that you're proposing there. For example, you use the one example where they were out drilling additional holes and monitoring wells. or that site, that would seem to be operational in my mind, as a mine operator myself, belonging to a company that operates mines, that depending on market conditions and the situation at the mine, sometimes that's all we can do to determine, do we need to go back into that mine, or do we need to continue having it in temporary suspension? It's a good suggestion. I think we just need to maybe put some sideboards on that a little bit with a clear definition, if there isn't one already.
But the mine that I was particularly referring to is a Sage mine. It has not operated since 1990. And even then, it didn't have the proper Bureau of Land Management permits to do so.
Would that not be
And,
corrected, though?
well, right. To move forward, they would have to submit a plan of operations to the BLM. This company, I don't think, has put a lot of money into the mine operation. It's not Energy Fuels. And they did some exploration. They left one of the exploration holes open, which a local residents discovered, and then later I brought that attention to the BLM in Monticello. It's just, so you suspend operation. You have a 2-year period, and after that, the division is supposed to make a 2-year review. And then after 5 years, the company is supposed to have division approval of an extension of that initial 5-year period. Well, that's 5 years where a mine operator can do mine exploration. And then you have an additional 5 years they can do mine exploration, and they can, then they have to come to the board. But during that time, they can do their exploration, but it's still under temporary suspension of operation. Nothing prevents them from putting in a lot of investment to bring the mine up into production. But to say after 5 years, okay, we're exploring, so that extends a period of non-operation, it just doesn't make sense. Because I just see what has happened at these mines over the years. And you're talking, the Sage mine, I bet anybody, anything, that mine will never operate again. The mine owner had a mill licensed but not constructed over in the Paradox Valley, and the state of Colorado just withdrew the license for the construction operation of that mill. It's just, they just sit there. There's no reason that mine operator shouldn't have to reclaim that mine. He has not put any money into that mine.
We don't really have the opportunity to hear their side of the story today.
Right, but
there's no doubt
that's true. I mean, that's why you have proposed rulemakings.
Certainly,
and you propose them, and everybody gets a chance to submit their comments. What I don't think should happen is that a mine should be on standby and for decades, for 20 or 30 years, and then all they have to do is do a little exploration, they get an extension of that period, just through a little exploration.
I think
that shouldn't be considered operation if the mine is already on standby.
Thank you.
Okay.
I
It's
just,
just
Another
my
follow-up question?
experience.
just one more comment is
Okay.
that certainly there are operators out there that probably need to be, that are bad actors that the division probably needs to look into. And I don't think we have any qualms about saying that certain operators probably should be brought to the table and their minds reclaimed. So I think we need to, we're hearing your presentation, and I think we need to hear from the division and probably from the operators themselves before any kind of definitive or final determination is made. But thank you for bringing this.
Yeah, well, that's just a definition. Basically, you have regulations on the books, and they're not being enforced.
Mike?
Ms. Fields, thank you for the presentation. It was very educational. I have a couple of questions just to educate the board a little bit further, if you could answer some questions for us. So from my perspective and what you've given, there's a concern for safety, for open portals, degrading equipment. There's also the concern of radon emissions. Is that correct? Are there other major concerns?
Yeah, that's a concern. And just as concern, what you have regulations, but they're not being enforced. And
Understood.
I don't have any pictures there of some of the conditions of some of these mines back in about 2010, 2012, where a lot of trash and junk and which has later been cleaned up, but some of these mine sites are in very poor condition and just did not reflect a company that, because some of these companies, these mines, they go through different mine owners over the years, and it didn't reflect basic care and concern on the part of the mine owners or actually the division.
I understand. Thank you. One just final question, and maybe you don't know the answer to this. Do you know what the background radon emissions are in the area anyway, open mines notwithstanding? If we were to compare background with what's being emitted from these vents, what kind of a difference would we see?
I really don't know what the background would be, and a background would be different at different mines. And when a mine opens, often there's not a requirement to take background measurements of radiation. I do know that they took measurements of the radiation levels at the Dineros mine because it was at an existing mine site, so there were high levels of uranium and some of the other materials because from the waste rock piles that were already there. But there's no cleanup standard. There's no standard where you go to where the ore pad is, where they're required to measure what the radiation levels are and clean it up to a certain standard. There's no requirement for that. There are no specific either BLM or state regulations that differentiate a uranium mine, which has all these radiological and sometimes non-radiological, like arsenic and silicon concerns, from let's say a copper mine or another type of hard rock mine where you don't have those issues.
Thank you.
On the left, questions?
I also wanted to thank you for bringing this to our attention, and your observations, many of them I think have real merit. I do want to second what I've heard from some of the other board members. Temporary suspension is a really valid and important tool in the mining industry for responding to changing market conditions. And I can point to many mines across the U.S. that, for instance, closed back in the 80s temporarily that have now been operating and producing minerals, copper, et cetera, for decades since then after a several-year hiatus. So we want to keep that as an industry tool to respond to market forces in the most efficient manner. It's better economically, it's better environmentally to extract as much as we can from these ore bodies. But we also don't want, that to be an excuse for abuse of a temporary suspension. For me, I think the most important thing is during that temporary suspension, the site needs to be safe and stable, not pose an imminent threat to the public, not pose an imminent threat to the environment, not having contaminant dispersal during that shutdown period. And interim management plan seems like a good way to ensure that. I guess I just wanted your observations on the BLM interim management plans, and do they fulfill that requirement, in your opinion?
I think in 2014, when Energy Fuels submitted these interim management plans, it was more of a generic interim management plan where they had basically the same plan for all the different mines, where particularly there's a difference between a dry mine and a wet mine. A wet mine, like the Rim mine and the Energy Queen mine, they have an old water treatment system. And when those ponds, sometimes lined, sometimes unlined, dry up, you have radiological contamination left in these ponds that can blow around. They are fenced, however, I mean, we saw swallows when there was water in some of the old ponds dipping down. So I think they need to be site-specific plans, and there's an opportunity for the public to make a comment on these plans, because the BLM regulation was they're supposed to have an interim management plan with their plan of operations, and that's an opportunity for public comment. But then I think they had an old one for the Velvet mine, but not for the LaSalle mines, some of these other mines. There should be an opportunity for public comment where someone who maybe is a little bit familiar with the situation has an opportunity to have input. It shouldn't just be a generic plan, site-specific plan.
Thank you.
Others? I have a few questions. These are more for the division. I'm assuming that we're not going to hear the whole issue today. This was a briefing session.
It was.
Okay. Could you give us the status of the rulemaking, where we are in the process? And a follow-up question to that is rulemaking dealing solely with uranium and radioactive type mines, or is it generic as to all mines?
Mr. Chairman, the second item on the agenda is actually a companion to this discussion to talk about the rulemaking status.
Oh, good. Okay.
We may want to go ahead and defer until Paul and Dana can get up here and answer those questions.
Okay. Then we'll do that then. We'll defer to that. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's been very helpful and very informative. Much appreciated.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to our second briefing item, mineral suspension rulemaking update.
So with this, Dana Dean, our Associate Director of Mining, and Paul Baker, our Manager for the Minerals Regulatory Program, are going to give you that update, and they can certainly answer the questions that you just posed, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Thank you for allowing us to take a little bit of time here. And I'd like to start off by thanking Ms. Fields for her presentation and bravery in coming before this group and expressing her concerns. And I'd like you to know that we've been working with her for a while and listening to her concerns. A lot of those fixes that she would like, such as having uranium being having different rules than other minerals mines, that's a legislative issue that the division can't take care of. That would be something that the Utah legislature would have to decide to enact. The rulemaking, to answer your question, Mr. Chair, deals with all minerals mines, both small and large. And what we decided to do after first speaking with Ms. Fields, we realized that the definition of suspension in our minerals rules is not clear at all. So there is no, and we were actually interpreting it differently than we do today. And we recognize that there is a huge difference between some of the operators that you've seen us bring before you to suspend and take away their permits and their bonds and clean up after them, operators who have walked away and left a mess, a situation that's either a public hazard for safety or an environmental hazard, and they refuse to try to fix anything or follow the rules. And we definitely take those seriously, and we've been there's quite a backlog, unfortunately, but we've been doing what we can to bring those to you and fix those situations. We see those as clearly different from a company who is maintaining their site and doing everything that the division asks them to. They have no violations, and they're keeping their site up according to the rules and just waiting for a change in commodity prices. Those are very different stories, and we want it to be clear that the division realizes that and does not want to change that. We do want to change the definition of suspension so that it's clear to everyone, the public, the operators, and the division, when someone needs to come in with that 2-year, or it's been 2 years, we need to give you an interim plan. It's been 10 years, we need to go to the board. And those would be public comment opportunities, but those things do need to happen. They have not been happening in some cases because we have been unclear as to what suspension means because of the way the rule is written. Paul will give more information, but last year we sent out a first version of this rule change. We tried to include some other changes, and it got very unwieldy. Both sides, there were very disparate comments, and there was no way to bring those together into something that made sense. So we've done a rewrite that we hope fixes the problem we're trying to fix, and we hope that we have the board support on that. But I'll let Paul talk about that, and then if you have further questions, either of us can try to answer those.
So what happened was last year we had proposed some new rules, and we had a meeting of stakeholders in June of last year, and as Dana mentioned, we received several comments, disparate comments, thinking that the rules were either too stringent or not stringent enough. And we've gone back and tried to make the rules more in keeping really with the Act. And let me just explain just a little bit. If a mine has been in suspension for 5 years, the division may, after giving the operator a chance to appeal to the board, require reclamation. According to the rules, the division must require reclamation if a mine has been in suspension for 10 years, unless prior to the expiration period, the operator appeals to the board. The Act says that the division may require reclamation if a mine has been continuously shut down for 5 years. But again, what does suspension mean? What does shut down mean? The definition of mining operations includes exploration. So if somebody's exploring, is that mining operations? Well, that's the way the current definitions are. But there are a lot of other things. Does maintenance count as does that count as mining operations? Or what if somebody is processing ore or removing ore from the site? All of those things are questions that are not answered. So we have drafted a new set of rules, and actually, after listening to the discussion today, including some of the comments from the board, I feel like I want to go back to these rules and make some additional changes. But what I've tried to do in doing this is to stick more closely to what the Act says. And so the version is actually pretty much ready for the public, except, like I say, I'd like to make a few changes. One thing that became very, very clear after the last set of public comments from the mining industry was they want certainty as to when the division will require reclamation. Because, as has been mentioned, mine operators spend a lot of money getting these permits, and they want to know for sure that they're going to have the opportunity to mine. And so that's one thing that we've tried to do, is to add some provisions where the division will allow an extended suspension period under certain circumstances. So that's kind of where we are with the rulemaking. As far as mines that are in suspension, we committed in December that after we received annual reports for 2017, we would go through annual reports that we've received over the last several years and come up with a list of those mines that have not had production for periods of 5 to 10 years or longer, and go through those and decide what we need to do. If we need to require reclamation, if we need to ask for further information from the mines, from the operators, and we're in the process of doing that right now. So that's kind of where we are.
I just wanted to make one more comment. I didn't want to go back and forth on each point that Ms. Fields made, but on the inspection side of things, we do inspect as much as we can every mine in the state of Utah. We have a small minerals program and a lot of mines, so it's not possible for us to be out there every day or every week or every month. That, again, if the legislature wanted to fund more inspectors in the minerals program, we would gladly do that. And the follow-up on recommendations in inspection reports, I will tell you my staff is very knowledgeable. They're very good at what they do. They're not afraid to write a violation if there's a violation. So there could be an instance of them not recording. Maybe we need to do better at writing our inspection reports to follow up on things like that. But I don't think that we have any glaring violations out there at the particular mines that we're talking about that have been ignored by the division in any way whatsoever.
Thank you. In the interest of time, and we are going to go through the full briefing session, we're not going to cut it short. I think some of the comments made by the board members, particularly Rich's comments, I think should be principles that we try to comply with in terms of these new proposed rules that we don't have.
Yes, again, the rule that we will shortly be sending out to the informal rules group focuses very clearly on the definition of suspension. Some of the other ideas that Ms. Fields had that are worth examining would be outside the scope of the current rulemaking, and probably would involve a larger audience of people commenting and making decisions. So the rulemaking itself is very focused on the definition of suspension so that we can start to do what those other requirements are.
Board members, do you have a feeling about expanding this at all? Or is that something we should discuss among ourselves and then need more information? Okay. We do need more information on this. We would like to know where this is going. I think you did respond to the inspections question I have. Are all of these mines fully bonded that were discussed today?
Yes.
And do all of them have interim plans, or is that something that's part of this?
No, that's part of the what we're trying to clarify so that we can get the interim plans. But no, they do not.
Mike, do you want to have a statement?
Just an editorial comment. I've been on this board for 5 years, and I continue to get concerned when I hear we don't have staff to inspect. And I understand that's your plea to get more support. I think one of the things we need to put on our list, Mr. Chair, how do we get our regulatory body, our division, to have the inspectors they need, not only for oil and gas. I think we're dropping the ball when we allow operators to begin operations, but we don't have the sources resources necessary to hold them accountable. I think I make this speech almost every time I hear this, but it's a concern of mine.
Good concern, and I am the one that said that. But I will say, although we're not doing as many inspections as some people may feel comfortable with, we do not have environmental disasters out there as a cause from mining in the state of Utah. We have good operators overall. They're following the rules, and we do spend a lot of our time on the people that aren't. And again, those are the people that you see us bring to you, and we ask to revoke their permits and things. But the majority of people are just following the rules, doing a good job. There are not big issues out there that we're missing by not having more inspectors. It's just we're not checking a box as often as some people may like, but we're not experiencing any environmental or off-site impacts due to that.
So Dana, when someone goes into a suspended operation, or any operator, and this may be a leading question, but why can't a lack of inspections be circumvented by an increase in reporting responsibility? Maybe they submit a report annually or semi-annually telling you where they're at with photographs and other things to keep us on target. Is there something in place like that?
No, there's not. That's not in place, but that could be very helpful. One thing we tried to do in the last rulemaking was increase in annual report requirements. That didn't go over really well, but I would be comfortable with allowing companies to send us in certified reports and pictures to supplement our inspections. I think still, if we had a citizen's concern or there was an issue that we knew about, we would still want our own inspectors on site, but I would have no problem with that being a piece of the puzzle that helps to get more information for the public and us, and at a more frequent rate.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I would like to say that this will be on our radar screen. We'd like that to be something we talk about in the near future, both as to the proposed rulemaking and then in the expanded discussion that would incorporate the things, some of the things that we've heard today, if that would be okay.
Yes,
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next agenda item, disposal facility bonding discussion.
And let me ask you, Mr. Chairman, in the interest of our formal agenda, do you want to proceed or do you want to take a recess from this and continue after the formal matter?
I think we're on it right now. Let's
Okay.
keep going.
All right. With that, then, Bart Kettle, who is currently managing our operations group through career mobility that we've recently given him. We had Dan Jarvis retire, as you remember, in December, so Bart has taken on that responsibility, doing a great job overseeing our field operations group, and he's going to give us a presentation on disposal facility bonding this morning.
Okay, good morning, Bart Kettle with the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. In the interest of time, I'm going to make this very brief.
Don't make it very brief. We want to know about this.
Okay.
So give us your presentation, and that's our request.
Okay, fair enough. So the reason for the presentation is just to give the board an update on the status of 5-year renewal with oil and gas disposal facilities, because there is some potential that one of these items could come before this board in the near future as a request for agency action. And so the why for a 5-year renewal on waste disposal facilities is R649-9-8. And in rulemaking, so this went into effect July 1st, 2013. And what the rule essentially says is that existing facilities have until July 1st, 2018 to submit to the division a site reclamation and post-closure bond as required by R649-9-8.2. So what does a renewal application include? Just a site description of the facility and what the function of the facility is. If there is any contamination at the site, an assessment of those contaminated materials, an assessment of equipment that's used to operate the facility on a day-to-day basis, an assessment of practices that are used to operate the facility over time, and then a summary of monitoring that's either been done historically, is currently being done, or is being proposed moving forward. And then a renewal will also include a closure cost estimate from a responsible third party. That cost estimate, if there is any contamination that at the site, an estimated of the cost to remediate that contamination, an estimate for addressing infrastructure used in the operations of the facility, and an estimate of contouring and reseeding costs. So what does this affect? The division primarily administers permits for two types of facilities: land farms for dealing with hydrocarbon impacted solids, and evaporation ponds for dealing with produced fluids. Just as a point of clarification, 5-year renewal does not affect Class 2 injection wells that are bonded on a well bonding on an individual or a statewide bonding basis. So as you would expect, a bulk of the facilities are located in the Uinta Basin in Duchesne and Uinta counties, with a couple located in Sevier, Grand, and San Juan County. And then just a little bit of overview on what the division's done to prepare operators for renewal. Starting in the summer of 2017, we put together a guidance document for operators and third-party contractors to help them in preparing a renewal application. That was posted on the oil and gas homepage under publications and handbooks and guidance documents. As the process started to move along, it became apparent to us that there were a couple more items that would help third parties and operators, and so those have also been posted there. I believe that was in December of 17 and January of 2018. In September through November of 2017, the division went out to facilities on site, met with facility operators, took the time to talk about what renewal included, ask questions about the overall renewal concept, answer any questions they had, and then also address site-specific items with operators on site. Those interactions are continuing almost at a daily basis at this point. The division issued a couple letters, one in December of 2017, one in April of 2018. The letters list the requirements of facility renewal, and then also point operators to some of the resources that are available to them to help them through this process. And the division's also posted several notices on the website just to kind of as outreach to operators and the general public as well. So just kind of a brief update of the status of where it's at. We are receiving our first applications at this point. Multiple operators have submitted applications to us. We're aware that quite a few of them are in the works and will be submitted here in the near future. It feels like the bulk of the facilities are ready to go through the renewal process and are in many cases using it to their advantage. But really the function of this briefing is just to give the board, like I said, an update in case there's a request for agency action down the road. So that's what I came prepared to present. Are there questions from the board?
Board members, down on the left this time.
Bart, is there any disposal pond facilities that are orphaned and unbonded in the state that we would have to be concerned about?
So there's no facilities that I would classify as orphaned or unbonded at this state. There is one facility that is in a bankruptcy status, and it does have an existing bond on it from the rules that were in place prior to July 1st in 2013. I'm unsure of their status and how they will go through this process of renewal. So there is a bond in place, but it is not a full cost estimate bond.
Okay, so it may be inadequate to, under current conditions for restoration if it's,
It may be, in the case of this facility, it's one of the more simpler ones in the state, so it may be adequate too.
thank you.
Other questions? Rich?
Yes, have you done any just back of the envelopes? What sort of bonding requirements are we talking about for cost?
A dollar figure, is that what you're asking for?
Yes, just an order of magnitude. Curious what sort of numbers you may be coming up with.
Well, I'll speak on what I've seen from cost estimates from third parties that are being developed right now. So far, the estimates that I've seen have ranged from somewhere in the neighborhood of $270,000 to just short of $3 million.
Thank you.
Questions on the right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Just so you know that this could be an item we'll need to bring back to the board depending on how the status of these renewals go. To make it very quick at this point, I just wanted to point out to you that in June, we're going to have our field trip and hearing to, I think it's
Delta.
Juab County, isn't it?
Delta, Utah.
Millard County, excuse me. So it's to Delta, and you'll be seeing the Magnum facility, as well as we're going to be taking a trip out to the Materion beryllium mine. So we'll be leaving on the 26th bright and early, probably between 7 and 7:30 in the morning. You'll get more detail on the agenda during the month, but that'll be Tuesday, the 26th, and then on the 27th, we'll have the board hearing in Delta. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you very much. Just so you board members, you know, on June 13th, I've been invited to go out to the Uinta Basin to look at some surface owner issues out there. And I think John Rogers will be going with us to that meeting. Just wanted you to know that we're going to follow up. That's a follow-up on the proposed rule, or proposed legislation that came out this year, that find out what is the basis behind it, and we'll come back and report to the board and what that is all about. At this time, it's the part of our agenda where the public has an opportunity to address us about issues that would be under our jurisdiction. Is there anyone from the public here that would like to address the board? Seeing none, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and when we come back, we'll go to our first agenda item, CAP Energy. Thank you.